And you're live.
This is House Education, Thursday, May 8th, 2025, continuing our discussion of H54 cell phone free schools bill. We're going to try to a little bit more into our discussion we had yesterday with Legislative Council, try to clarify some things, maybe see how we want to incorporate what we just heard. Maybe you could bring us up to speed as to where we have failed to give you strong guidance.
Clear, unambiguous.
St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel, you have not failed at all in anything. So, based on our discussion yesterday, I drafted something that's it's probably, I think it needs work, but I drafted something that is less, well, let me just pull it up for social media platforms. We talked about being more general and just instead of an outright ban, saying everyone come up with their own policy. And so this is the language that I have for you all to beat up. Each school board or governing body of an independent school or pre-qualified private pre-kindergarten provider shall develop, adopt, and ensure, and the age ranges here are broad, but because we're talking about, I mean, I don't know that pre-K students are going to be communicated with directly.
But still.
So I'm just, we may want to pull that out. I tried to make it the same as cell phones. So they shall develop, adopt, and ensure implementation of and make available in the manner described in subdivision 563, one of this title, a policy to govern the use of social media within schools. Policy developed and adopted pursuant to this section shall prohibit schools, school districts, and supervisory unions from using social media for communication with students directly unless it's an approved platform by the school, and then those archiving and no editing caveats are on there from yesterday. And then the policy should also prohibit schools from requiring students to use social media for out of school academic work, homework, which by the definition of its name, I think would be out of school.
Yeah, that's true.
School sports, extracurricular clubs, or any other out of school sponsored activities. And then sounds like we have some work to do on the effective dates. And I took out the definition of social media. Completely.
So I just say if we want to follow what we just heard, rather than saying each school board or governing body, you can say the AOE shall create a model policy.
That was fine.
That was about cell phones, not social media, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm saying now we're going to add, despite their objection to social media being part of it, we can make that part of it.
You'd like to see the same.
Oh, I'm throwing it out to the group.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
So why did we take social media, the definition of social media out of it?
Hard to keep.
I think really because we kept getting twisted around as to what qualifies, what doesn't qualify.
Couldn't we write in that we revisit it, keep it in there, and then we can write into it that to be updated on an annual basis, or some other kind of, I don't know. I don't necessarily like the idea of taking that out of there because it leaves too much latitude. I understand the latitude for what's emerging, but it also leaves latitude for allowing some of it that maybe shouldn't be allowed. I'm just trying to work through my concern.
Yes, Beth, please.
If we don't have to put in a definition of social media, I'm more comfortable not putting it in there because I think it's so evolving and so involved. I think if we don't need to have the definition and we just have this part about social media, I'm a little more comfortable doing it that way. Because it's ever evolving. You'd be updating it every week.
Now we are, I would say, passing the buck
Deal breaker.
and saying, you define it, schools. Yeah, please.
I'm trying to keep track of all the drafts here. How different I'm looking at yesterday's draft, the definition of social media when we still had it in. Was that different than what was in the original bill that the lawyer we heard from yesterday said had sort of, had been looked at by a lot of experts in the field, not necessarily in Vermont, but.
I did not hear your testimony from the lawyer yesterday. I'd be happy to go back and take a look at that in all of my free time. The definition, so yes, the definition in draft 2.1 that you looked at yesterday was very different than the definition in the bill as introduced, and the definition from the bill as introduced was taken from federal law. So I'm not surprised to hear that many people have read it before. But it was taken from federal law in a very specific context related to research projects, related to human trafficking. That doesn't necessarily mean it's not an appropriate definition here. It wasn't a school context. But yes, that definition.
I guess I meant to send you a message yesterday after that testimony, and it was pretty short.
Okay.
It had me thinking, do we need to go back to the original?
You want me to pull that up?
I was just working on it. That might be.
The most recent definition that we have had was language that came from the bill sponsor, that came from, I think, essentially the same place that the lawyer yesterday talked about. And just to point out that it didn't sound like the group of people who sort of put that definition together were necessarily sort of like legislative writing experts, but more like, how can we create a definition that works for people?
So even like I had mentioned with the AOE, I think the definition is specific to what we can or can't compel students to use. And I think the original definition is broad enough to encompass like the original definition that's on the screen is broad enough to encompass what could be coming. And it's pertaining only to what schools or districts or SUs can have the students or tell them they have or required to use or not use. What the schools decide to use for their internal piece, I feel is where we're leaving it up to them. So I think having the definition in is extremely important for what the prohibition on what they can compel or require students to use.
Representative Quimby.
And that's part one, but it also does talk about social media use within the school. So that's where the conflict is. Because there's two parts to the social media. It's how schools can use it and how they can communicate with kids. And I think that's what we keep getting caught up on as we try to develop a definition.
That's an important distinction.
Yes.
But I think that distinction can be made in like even, like yesterday, unless approved by an educator or insert school.
Right. We did come up with some language yesterday.
Yeah.
Right. I'm saying the definition staying in there, is something that I think is important.
Broad.
Representative Harple.
All school libraries have selection policies, and didn't we also work as a legislature last biennium to talk about selection policies? Is there a way that we could sort of combine those philosophies? Because, the world of the internet is much like the world of the library. It's got really bad things and really good things, and it's going to get tons more. How could we incorporate sort of that language in it? This is really about selection policy.
Mm-hmm.
If we go down that path, then we're going to have librarians in saying they want that job or they don't want that job.
Well, they are our media and technologist integrationists at our schools. I have a library license, like I've been through the program,
Yeah.
I understand the scope of it.
I apologize for taking us back to this definition because now I remember how
Get rid of it.
tricky B or B and C feel
Yeah.
like overly limiting of all kinds of things that might be, and this is sort of where Leanne took it. So that was a unnecessary detour and I apologize.
All right, sorry, I withdraw the librarian.
But I'm, yes, now remembering why that seems so
Everybody,
unworkable.
everybody's welcome to put things on the table and then voluntarily remove them from the table.
I think this is where I use the J. Crew example.
Yes.
Yeah,
Enables one or more users to generate content that can
Yeah.
be viewed by other users. Like anyone who anyone who owns a website or manages a website is going to be generating content to be viewed by other users of the media.
Maybe we need a quick review of like, where did we leave off yesterday on this?
or I just,
I don't think we left, so my memory is we did not land on any definition, changes. I think I suggested in taking the language to just a general, everyone come up with a policy. It has to at the very least do these two things
Mhm.
to remove the definition of social media. That's my memory of yesterday. If you are asking AOE to develop a model policy, you can either make an assumption that there will be a definition in there, or you can specifically ask the model policy to contain a definition of social media. I think we also looked at a couple different definitions that I found. One in kids code that was being used, one that's in the Fair Labor and Employment Practices Act, and the Merriam-Webster definition, which I would not recommend for these purposes.
Right, go ahead.
I'm gonna go just to a high level about this and go back to, you did this for us yesterday, talk about why we're doing this. And, I'm going back to where it says personal electronic devices and policy requirements. And I'm sort of leaning back toward what the agency was saying, and we're asking a policy to be written to prohibit student use of cell phones and personal electronic devices at school from arrival to dismissal. I want to make sure that we're still on that same page for that.
We need to revisit personal electronic devices.
Well, that I understand. I mean, I do understand that. I get that. But I want to make sure that we're going back to the basics and saying what we're asking for is a school board or governing body of an independent school or pre-qualified pre-kindergarten provider to say prohibit cell phone from bell to bell. And if we're there, then I think we just need to decide, are we going to, in this policy, allow the flexibility for schools? Is it our intent, I'm not talking about language, but is it our intent to allow schools and governing bodies to, with some definitions or some guidelines, to get a policy in place so that each school can adapt it to their own needs and readapt it as they need to without any prescriptive language. I'm struggling with
Are you
the
talking about
We have
the
two
social
different-
media or are you
we're
talking about the prohibitive?
the whole implementation of this policy, which is we're bell to bell prohibiting, but we know there needs to be exceptions. And we have listed a bunch of exceptions, which I'm comfortable with. Do we need to go farther, or can we just give it to schools, the VSBA and the AOE, to create that model policy? Policies get updated all the time anyway. I don't think we need to be saying, I'm struggling with the language of the model policy that was coming from the AOE. And I felt it was incredibly vague and.
Right, we can put guardrail, so if we want to go down the path of saying, you know, something, all right, we'll let the AOE develop the model policy. They're working with VSBA and VSA and VPA for months and months now. We don't have a model policy, of course. But if we do that, we can put guardrails on it. We can say a bell to bell it must be a bell-to-bell policy that prohibits the use of cell phones.
But we've done that here, right?
But we're not, but this doesn't tell AOE to come up with a policy.
social media.
Understood, and I'm not suggesting we do that, I'm just saying that was one of the options, but our policy requirement is very clear. It feels to me like we're honestly overthinking.
That's right, that's what I'm wondering.
Just need to back off from it and decide whether we actually are really trying to limit children's access to cell phones or prohibit children's access to cell phones, and that would include social media.
So two,
Within
I think
that-
that's,
It's two different
they're
things.
two different
They are,
things.
and
That's why this
we
is
have-
complicated.
Right.
I don't think we're overcomplicating. It's a freaking complicated
We're just, we want.
media world we live in, and
Right.
so we're stuck in the morass now.
But schools are doing it right now all the time.
The bell to bell part is one thing, the like social media, what is it? When can you use it? Who can use it? Who's communicating with whom, where? Like there's like two different big policy goals, I think, of this bill, which I, again, support, but that's why this is really hard. We are trying to tackle two different big policy
I think
areas.
that the only problem that, that I'm hearing outside is the problem that parents have with if they had a kid who wasn't on any social media, and then the school said, hey, you're gonna need to get Instagram to get these messages. That's the hangup. So that's the only hangup.
All right, so I'm gonna say we actually got three things going on here. We have got banning cell phones, bell to bell. We have got compelling the use of social media as a way to communicate,
All right.
and we have using social media, period, in an academic setting.
Right.
So the first two, I thought we sort of into some consensus, not full agreement, and we certainly haven't taken a straw poll, but we have some consensus that, because we've got a language in front of us that we've developed on the first two. It's the third one that we're still tackling.
We're still stuck on some of the details of the first two.
I think we have
No, I'm
consensus
not
on the
talking
third,
about
just the
the details. I'm
details.
talking about
We could,
concept.
right, we
Concept,
could,
yes.
we could not tackle the third. Representative Taylor's.
Focused on the cell phone and it's compelling
Yeah.
to use.
The third is essentially a new not new in that, but the way that the lawyer put it yesterday, which makes a ton of sense and is terrifying, but that would be a new level of restriction that's not at the bill right now. The saying basically, an athletic director can't have an Instagram page for the volleyball team. We're saying you can't require the kids to be on it. That's what this bill's doing, but she was saying best practices, schools should stop having Instagram pages for all their sports teams.
But if we.
They probably should, but that's not where this bill right now is, and if we're going there, that's another.
That's not.
If we know the school
That's
can't
number three.
compel students to collect information from social media, then doesn't it solve the problem anyway?
I don't think
I mean,
it's down
it's
to one.
percent of it, right?
Again, I would go one, bell to bell, two, compelling the use of social media for direct communication. We could stop there.
Yes.
Mhm.
Where the draft bill is right now is
Yeah.
those two.
And then we got into the use, just the use of social media in academic settings.
One and two are huge. One and two are huge.
They are, that's where we started.
And it's easy.
I guess personally, I believe that schools are gonna, on their own, deal with number three.
Yes.
And that's actually what we want. is
Absolutely.
We trust our educators and. Okay, I hear you. And I want your expression on this, because that's really important. I mean, I'm not an educator.
Number three was in the original bill as well. It talked about,
Yes, it was.
it talks about limiting access to social media during the school day. So they were all in there.
Right,
Define it.
that part,
Define
yes.
it.
I think what I heard yesterday was
Oh, yeah, from the lawyer, we heard a whole nother
the
level.
other,
But all
the
three
representation we got from
addressed.
Chester about, really robust community engagement. And they're reaching the community, not the students, in lots of ways that includes using social media. In an ideal world, should we probably be saying, stop? Yes, but I don't think that the schools are gonna, as long as we live in a social media saturated world, and as long as, quite frankly, voters have to pass budgets, so schools have to sell their story all the time to their community. I don't think that number three, using social media as kind of a storytelling platform, is going away. And I personally do not want to go there in this legislation.
We could go there a little bit if we're gonna sort of basically turn a bunch of this over to the AOE to put in place. we can say, we can compel the AOE to consider the issue of the use of social media in developing its guidelines.
Parents
Not
are-
require it because it is a difficult morass, but they could at least say, you can't be putting rosters on Instagram.
Because we know what happens.
Different than what.
Which I think if we use the version of this we had yesterday, and then add in that where they do, work on those guidelines about, like, if there is a team coach that creates an Instagram page that they do not require the students to be on, there's guidance around what is allowed and not allowed. I think that helps take care of the third aspect, but I think that attaching that to what we had for language on yesterday's version would be appropriate.
I don't disagree in principle. I think that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for the AOE or a lot of work for school. Like, I think that of us thinking this is easy is we're getting pretty far away from that if we're going down the path of somebody having to define, whether it's AOE or schools, what exactly in your posts about your soccer team can you include and not include, can you have, that's taking us down a very probably the path that we should be on societally, but just saying it's going to be a lot of work, once again, for AOE in schools.
And I was saying that only if we want to touch that third item. I think, moving forward with the bill we had on the table with Rep. Taylor's change yesterday fits everything we've been working on very well, minus that piece. And I think what we had yesterday was a very workable and appropriate bill, and making significant changes to it, I think, is unnecessary personally.
All right, I'm gonna suggest a path forward, and again, I'm just putting it out there on the table for people to discuss. That we have a bill that compels the AOE to develop a policy that prohibits the use of cell phones bell to bell with necessary exceptions. But I know they said prohibit and limit, right? We could just say prohibit with necessary exceptions for
Say necessary exceptions.
compelling student need or some sort of language like that. That would build in the sort of 504. And we could say such as IEPs, 504s, and
Personal health.
individual health plans.
Well, they gave us.
I have to say, I liked how they changed the part, because I think when we were getting very prescriptive about, dual enrollment, CT, you're always gonna
Yeah, I don't
forget
wanna go there
something.
either.
So I
Oh,
liked their
yeah. All right.
language about,
If an administrator grants.
Yeah, I like
permission
that.
to possess cell for academically,
appropriate or.
Yeah.
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 Because it may be appropriate,
yeah.
things we haven't thought.
That's a trust the folks in the field.
That's right.
Admin can figure it out.
I'll just add that when we were on the tour at CC, at the Career Center,
Yeah.
I asked the automotive guy about cell phones, and he said, we've got pockets in the classroom. The kids know they're supposed to put them in the pockets. He goes, the only time that they ever want to take them out of the pocket is in the industry. The customer, what they're doing now is they're putting more video and more pictures
Yeah.
and sending those things to the customer, so that the customer knows what work is actually being done or has been done.
Yep.
So they will bring their phone in, they'll take a quick video under the hood or whatever, and then they put the phone back in the pocket. Makes sense to me if that's what's happening in industry. But I would say that I don't think that that's different from the testimony we got around being part of the school newspaper or whatever, and using your phone to lay it on the desk and interview the person you're interviewing. And then you stop, and then the phone gets put away, and you can refer back to that video when you're writing your article or whatever. I think those are the same thing. And that's what I know when I've been interviewed by folks here, they're recording it on their cell phones, so.
Yeah,
And I also don't love
It's required,
word-
it just means it's allowed.
ban or prohibit. I like more the word restrict or whatever. But
I think when
Maybe
you
the
say
minority.
ban and then you give a list of exceptions, it's like, well, that's not really, prohibit means not. It doesn't mean not with restrictions, so maybe, I don't know if there's other words, or maybe I'm wrong about that word, Beth, and you can just correct it.
I do like, I agree. I think you've raised good points. And so I like this better than the specifying dual enrollment ITE things. And I do think it's a slippery slope of an unfunded mandate here. If we want to be like super austere about this, we're potentially saying schools have to buy a truckload of digital cameras and recording equipment and iPads. I don't want to go down that road either, like that. But there are cameras that are used all the time in their office. So there's gonna have to be some like stuff figured out in the field about this, and just saying you can use cameras is a, you know, inexpensive and perhaps not practical solution to some of the issues that will arise.
So I was very taken with the, Stowe Hazen, Stowe superintendent. And they sort of went with a light touch.
Yeah.
But yet still appeared to be highly effective approach, which I think probably this
Right.
language,
Is that the Ryan Hardy? Is that
Yeah.
what you're talking about? Yeah.
Yeah, would be.
It's sort of like-
Yeah,
let people use let those in charge use common sense.
yes.
Under the exceptions, which is up there, I like B.
I do dual enrollment one.
No,
No,
'cause it takes where the underlying to administer grant permission for
Okay.
the accessory use. I mean, it covers so much. And it is what we're saying.
I think it also helps with the ever evolving technology. We can't think of everything that's gonna happen. And we need to trust our professionals do their job.
And we are an ever evolving committee. Does everybody, since, and I realize that the presentation day was from AOE, however, they worked with the V's on this, which gives me a little more confidence despite my vocalized skepticism. But comfortable with the idea that we'll turn the model policy development over, the required model policy development over to AOE.
With the consultation, because I think.
Yes, oh yeah, yeah, I'm basically using their
Yeah,
language.
which is what they have.
Right.
And then do you want to require what's not in AOE's recommended language, although I think you elicited this from their testimony, is that then school boards would be required.
Yes. And I suppose what to say, school, some language that would also capture the fact that it's headmasters, not boards of directors at independent schools. Yeah.
There's another term.
Yeah.
We use that in
In
page
yeah,
454.
Yeah.
Do we need to include pre-K?
No.
I,
Oh, let's go
does it
ahead.
hurt to include it? Because is it about the community?
Do we get into the public, private, like, is it pre-K in a school? Is it pre-K at
I
a
don't know.
provider? Is it CCFAP money? Is it
I think we can.
166 money?
I think,
You know-
I don't think we include it because I
I'm
think
okay.
we do get into.
I don't want to get into
I'm
that.
okay with leaving it out.
Yeah, I just.
I mean,
Just curious.
yeah, they're gonna,
I'm hoping we can assume that a private pre-K provider is not giving their students cell phones.
yeah, well,
But it's no.
it had a different purpose. It had more to do with.
Yeah, they don't, I would say they don't give them to them, but I definitely think there are moments in the day where those little kiddos and those
media.
teachers need some body calming time.
It's not just.
And there are videos on phones that are being shown.
Or
for sure.
iPads.
Absolutely.
And
And
they're
they're,
not students that are using them.
but the teachers are also often, maybe this is changing, documenting a lot.
Yes,
like
they are.
that's
Oh,
nice.
yes, yes, yes,
Like,
yes.
Your kid is napping. Look how nice Rob and Leanne are playing.
Let's leave them
I'm
out.
sorry, these are childcare, we're talking about pre-K here, which is just that 10 hours.
Let's just leave them out.
Well,
That's the.
so that's why.
But I'm happy to, it's
Okay.
comfortable.
We're taking pre-K out, and again, the language that you all are contemplating is prohibiting student use, not teacher use.
Right.
So I think you're
Right.
right.
Figure that out too.
Yes.
Uh,
Can I just say one thing?
please.
It should be very clear by now that I am not an educator. I don't love the term academically sound reason. That seems very vague to me.
It's a good.
But I am not in this field, and so I'm going to take direction from you all and from the field.
Or
So my only concern with the academically sound reason was the testimony we heard yesterday about some high school students who are basically professional athletes and use their smartwatches for training. So is that academic reason? Is that also legitimate
I
reason?
would say on the slopes, it's one thing, they probably don't need it in the classroom.
This.
Another heart rate. Pedagogical
In the
purpose.
Pedagogical purpose.
I think,
And-
I think we can scoop that in when we have a larger conversation about personal electronic devices.
Oh, you mean
Do
what
we
that?
really,
keep
do we really
reminding us of
care
the-
if an athlete has a special watch that's helping them train for the Olympics?
Well, I also-
Pedagogical purpose.
It depends.
They're learning, like there's something,
Yeah.
whether it's your own.
I agree.
or-
I think that's.
The history teacher said.
Because it might not be academic.
It says cell
medical.
phone. By the way,
Might be
it does
medical.
not say cell phone or a personal
Right,
electronic
right, right.
device.
That's true,
This,
Well,
but it
does.
should.
The policy says
Yes.
use cell phone or personal electronic device.
So part B maybe should say possess, use a cell phone or electronic device.
Well, we have to have a whole personal electronic device conversation.
I think we
Okay.
only need to include 3: cell phone, earbuds, smartwatch.
What we're looking at there, is that AOE
Yes,
That's their
from this
B.
morning,
yes.
right?
Yes,
Like,
yeah.
The underlying part
Just the
is.
underlying part.
I understand where people would be skeptical of academically sound. But I also think it's people in academics who put that information on that piece of paper.
I'm,
It's an academic purpose. The sound part requires discretion, like.
That's it.
I am sympathetic to Kate's comment, this was developed with these, and we're wordsmithing, but I actually like academic.
I do.
Academic purpose.
Yes.
Take out the word sound is what you're, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
You're
And changing reason to purpose.
for an
It's
academic
heavy duty wordsmithing.
purpose?
I like it better.
They have it for another purpose. It's not academic, a health reason.
That is that's an A.
But they might not have any of those things. I mean, that you could make, they could
I
make.
want to be just, I'm going to take a quick moment here to say, we got some cart before the horse stuff going on, only because we have scheduled testimony after this from the NEA. But I would offer the NEA right now an opportunity to comment if they would like. That's what,
On this particular,
on anything.
Sound reason.
In other words, I'm a little concerned that we're going to send legislative counsel off
Right.
to do work, and you're going to sit up in front and tell us why everything we're doing is wrong.
I'll stick around.
All right.
Anyways.
yeah, I'm happy to provide comments whenever appropriate.
Uh,
I don't want to interrupt your flow.
That was a generous word.
This is low and I'm on Pilgrim Road.
If you have, if you,
Yes.
I only, you seem to be adjusting your seat, and if you're kind of chomping at the bit to.
Oh, no, I literally, I just think.
Trying to read.
You've been watching videos the whole time.
TikTok videos the whole time.
Do you have any specific comment here?
I do have general comments.
So, yeah, give it to us.
Okay.
Well, this will be all blended time.
Okay, I will just have, so for the record, Colin Robinson, Vermont NEA. I will say, stepping back from a general perspective, I'm not gonna go through all the reasons. Our members are deeply concerned about student mental health. We surveyed our members this past spring. Scientific survey is the number one issue that educators deal with. 94% of our members identified as very serious or somewhat serious issues, top issue. So really appreciate the intensity of the focus on this. I would say we are comfortable with age 54. We think having statutory policy on this is appropriate and reasonable. And we also recognize the past practice that does exist related to school branding of going out to develop a model policy. I think where our bright lines are bell to bell, and it sounds like there's consistency on that. We do recognize and have often testified in other committees about the reality is what you're talking about here is the 7 or 8 hours that a child is in a school building. That's why Kid Safe Code is so important, age appropriate design code, because a lot of the social media harassment, et cetera, happens outside school hours. However, having that language around social media, however you figure out the definition, I think is really important in terms of making sure that students and youth are not exacerbating those issues inside a school setting and being compelled to. I think anytime you're touching on language, and one of my specific comments when you had the longer list was about English learners. But again, you start having a list, inevitably you forget something, right? But I think the underlying thing, and Chair Conlon, you spoke to this, is we don't want to be in a situation where we're compelling any child for economic reasons or financial reasons or personal belief reasons to be compelled to have a personal device, right? We are, as was mentioned earlier, dealing with echoes of addiction, smoking. I think all of us adults in the room who have devices of our own have those moments of reflection, and inculcating those positive habits early on. I would argue even potentially in a pre-K setting is appropriate. So with all that said, the other thing that I want to flag is whether you're going a statutory direction or a AOE, specificity and timeliness is critical. I think what we hear from our members, and obviously this survey from AOE shows that 50% or so of schools already have these policies. There's been a lot of conversation this morning about how there is a natural evolution towards this, but the expediency with which this happens is really actually important. And, you know, I've been around this building long enough, as you all have, you know, looking at the draft bill, here we are, almost middle of May already, and implementation July 1, 2026. Well, this doesn't go to the Senate till next year, then it's actually gonna be 2027. And we're talking about a lot of lag time of actually having the positive impact that I think you all want to, and that our members are hearing and feeling compelled to deal with. So I just sort of flagged that date issue that was raised earlier in conversation. The final thing I would just be remiss to say, in addition to student mental health issues, having consistent policy bell to bell across school districts across the state, we think our members want to focus, and several of you are educators in this room, want to focus on their students and their education. They don't want to be having to deal with, well, we have a different situation in this classroom or this classroom, or in my old school, we had this and now we have this. Having that baseline consistency is critical to our educators to focus on providing that robust education there. So headlines, we think statute is appropriate. Timeliness is critical. Integration of social media is important. And if you do shift towards an AOE policy, having as much of that, much of those guardrails around what will be compelled in that policy, we believe is really, really critical. And quite frankly, whether that's executed through statute or kind of the school branding policy construct, is a decision for you all to make.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
As Colin was speaking, I just was sort of processing some stuff in my head slowly as usual. And I sort of the AOE suggestions today, I think, could probably help with expediency, because part of what we might want to do is get this bill through as fast as possible, or let's just say this language through as fast as possible. And I think perhaps something that is a little more simplified might make that path much more successful.
Are we not talking about, at this point, looking at what the AOE is talking about, are we not looking at statute and policy? Because we're compelling policy to be heard.
I mean, the statute would just say that the AOE has to,
But it defines.
yeah, that would all be in statute, putting guardrails on what their policy has to be.
And what would we be talking about as an
As what?
implementation date?
I would say July 1, 2026. Of course, none of this stops any school from implementing policy way ahead of that.
Right.
Well, in fact, no, schools knowing that it will be law a year from now may have them work on it in the meantime anyway, to get ready for it.
Right.
Because I don't think there's any way to have it for next school year.
Yeah.
But it's May.
Colin, was that essentially your testimony that you were going to provide?
Yes, and I do have written testimony that's posted.
I know, I'm looking at the
Yeah.
clock and I think we'll just sort of use this as blended
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Of the two things.
Is there a way to really figure out if it is possible to get it for next school year? Like, I'm not totally sure I'm sold on that sort of blanket observation that we couldn't possibly implement this until next September.
We're back to January 1st, 2026.
Okay, as a teacher, I will say that
Because she
we
didn't
try
watch
and
it.
change the rules in the
You
middle of
said
the
it.
year. All we're
Oh, no,
gonna be
yeah,
doing
that's-
is torturing
no way.
teachers.
No way.
Well,
And everywhere. I told that.
it's day one.
Yeah.
Sure.
So here and then there.
Now, when we say statutorily, I am erring on the side of if we can not run this through a process at AOE that would take longer. But what's in the original bill has everybody, the statute would have everybody making their own policy, right? So that's the, which I also don't love because I would love it to be very common. So is there like a third option where we put what is the requirement here that gets at the sort of do it through statute, not through an AOE model policy?
I mean, I think you've done it.
Missing?
I think you've done it.
Yeah.
So this is draft 3.1.
I bet-
You require each school board to develop a policy. You've given them the definitions. The policy has to prohibit cell phones from arrival to dismissal. They may prohibit, again, there's discretion in there from outright bringing it to school altogether. And then allowing the policy to be tailored for how those devices are going to be stored if they are allowed to be brought to school. If you want to get more prescriptive than this,
Well, I think that's where the timeline thing is. We say what it is, there's maybe a way to do it by next school year. If we say school boards have to develop the thing to do the thing, then I think we've run out of time
Right.
for
Yes.
the day one of business. So
And
I don't
current-
know if there's another option. This is I'm not a lawyer. I don't understand what I'm doing.
so if
You
you,
could just ban them.
Well, that's what I
Not say
guess.
come
I
up with a
don't-
policy, but just.
yeah, I mean, yes, you could definitely do that.
Colin, go ahead.
I was just going to say, perhaps that third option, you could have all of that and compel the AOE to work with VSBA to create a model, have all of this in statute and sort of, for lack of a better word, I don't want to say a tandem process, but a complementary process. I don't know exactly what that would look like.
You could outright ban, you could just have a simple. I mean. You can just say. Students are prohibited from bringing cell phones to schools or using cell phones between arrival and dismissal in schools, period. And then you can have a whole separate statute that says, AOE develops a model policy. The model policy shall include these things. And then school boards, you adopt a policy that's at least as comprehensive as the model policy by such and such a date. I think the practical reality is if you just say ban use of no cell phones, you're still leaving the field with all of the questions that the model policy would hopefully flesh out. That's a policy choice you all can absolutely make. I don't think there's any way to thread the needle between giving school districts every thought process that they need in order for everyone to be on the same page and not have some more amount of work done to do that, whether that's you all and putting it into statute, which is not what I would recommend, or the policies.
Rep Dovich, then Rep McCann.
I think going back to H54, as it was yesterday, or if we agree on a different version of it, is the direction that we need to go. And I think that then having the AOE make a model policy for other districts to help all the districts and SUs create their own, like somewhere to start, so they don't feel like they're starting from whole cloth would be the adder to that. I think I feel like we're getting further and further away from, we're muddying the waters on how it gets implemented, who does it, who we're telling to do it. And I feel like next thing you know, it becomes a half-hearted attempt to make it happen. Going all the way back, Peter, to your comment to the AOE after they presented, like, I feel like that's the road we are currently on in this discussion.
Yeah, the H54 is what we're gonna, I mean, we're continuing to struggle with definitions. We continue to struggle with exceptions. I mean, we're sort of getting there. And again, you know, the AOE did work with the organizations that are ultimately going to be dealing with this. And what they presented was sort of the consensus feeling. I guess I'm not sure we can get away from the July 1, 2026 implementation. Just from a logistical point of view, I would hope that there's been enough anecdotal stories out there from districts that it's probably going to be, we're going to be 75% the way there anyway.
Yeah.
But again, I'm just, just from a practical point of view, I'm just not quite sure how we do that. Representative McCann?
Two things. One, around the timeline, if we go back and think about Ryan Haridy's testimony, he did talk about the importance of public input and getting surveying families. So I think if we have the 26th, there's time to survey the families once this moves forward before that 2026 deadline. And then also, while the AOE did not say they had a model ready to show us, I believe Sue Siglowski said that VSBA does have a model policy. So there's something there.
Tom Robinson from Monterey again. I think it was linked to in the AOE testimony. Can't speak to its completeness or efficacy, but the AOE does have a cell phone use schools in Vermont document from dated February 2025. And in there are some example of bell to bell sort of policy notions. Again, I haven't spent time with it enough to know if it's appropriate, but to this point, there's a lot already out there in the, whether it's districts that have implemented them, or some notions from the AOE that exist.
Yeah, it's a 7-page document on guidance.
Okay.
I have a bunch of examples.
I do.
All right, I'm going to try to bring us back to crafting a bill, or what I would say language that we might even think about attaching to the miscellaneous ed bill that comes back to us. So we have some things some other things that we need to decide on, like how we're going to define personal electronic devices, for one thing. And are we going to, as we talked about, sort of the 3 things that the bill was trying to do, are we going to drop number 3? We don't necessarily drop it. We could actually, if we're going to go with sort of compelling AOE.
Can I ask a clarifying question? About number 3.
Yes.
Number 3 right now is in invisible ink. It's not in our draft, right?
No, can you state what the 3, I don't know.
No, it's in our draft. So 1, bell to bell cell phone ban. 2, compelling or using social media for direct communication between students. 3, the use of social media, period.
That's
in our,
It says, there's a little something in there about schools using it.
This is for homework, you can't compel students to
No, you
use it.
can't compel, but I'm confused. I thought your number 3 is basically saying schools stop, period. There's no CHS athletics Instagram page run by adults, no anything. That's not what you mean by 3.
No,
because that's what I thought.
we never got, that was suggested by the testimony yesterday, but we never got into it.
Okay. Your number 3 is confusing me.
So we can, but, and I would say what thing we can do is we can sort of, it's part of our requirement for the AOE to consider appropriate use of social media in promoting
By schools,
school activities.
by schools.
And so we now, we'll go backwards. In policy, so we can, again, we put guidelines on the AOE as to what the policy must include. About communicating, student communication or direct communication with students. I would like to have something that includes Rep. Taylor's language about any communication program, platform.
Why don't we just use this language?
Great.
Instead of each school board, it would be AOE and the VSBA.
Yeah.
Develop a model policy.
Yes, required model
But then each
policies.
school board has to-
Yeah, then there would be a separate
That's a
piece
process.
for each cell phone, for both cell phones and for social
So
media.
number 2 is on the screen right there. We could just keep that in there.
Yes.
Is it possible to divide the question in a way that would allow the cell phone piece to pass for this upcoming school year while adding the other pieces as an amendment that we continue to work on?
I suppose. But again, we just have a order of operations, a timing. And are we really putting too much on schools? I mean, first of all, all we're talking about doing is requiring the AOE to come up with a policy.
Right.
Yes.
It just, when we keep getting back to that, we can't do this so fast, like some of this seems so simple and. Right, I know nothing's stuck, yeah, just like,
Policy process
What-
as a timeline, like if we're required, policies have to go through an adoption, the board has to meet, but these are the logistical things that.
but just, just like. Even with like a substance, the legislature can pass a law and then the law goes into effect and the town can't have, or the state can't have that substance, right? Like, can it be treated in sort of that way where we have the AOE and the school boards adopt the model policy related to everything else, the social media, the exceptions, but still can say, with that caveat of the administrative approval, no cell phones bell to bell. That seems in itself pretty easy.
Except we have to build in all the exceptions that we may or may not know.
Personal electronic device.
I'm just really not convinced we can't figure this out.
What would be wonderful is if all of the advocates in the meantime went to school boards and said, you need to do this right now. Yeah. No, actually, he's on the second one. Go ahead, Emily.
Well, I was just gonna say 2 things. The number 2 on here, I actually really agree with taking out the word homework.
It's unnecessary.
Yeah, it's
If you have that
redundant.
school.
in
Yeah,
fact,
I agree.
if we're gonna use this language. So if we turn this first line on this each school board and going into the AOE with the VSBA, then what we're doing with passing legislation, and to get to your point, Representative Harple, I think, we all feel the same compulsion to move as fast as possible. If we're passing this and we are not able to require the work to be done in time to implement this for the next school year, which is, I think, what we'd all love to do, right? Been working on this long enough. We at least are giving guidance that this is coming, and, that is in itself a message to the field and to school districts. That this is a time, if they're contemplating it, to move forward with it. I haven't read their guidance, but I want to read the guidance because there's a pretty big guidance on here. I also we keep saying cell phone, and I don't know whether we're saying cell phone and personal electronic device when we do this.
We have to come back to that conversation.
So I
So,
really want to make sure we're clear on that.
oh yeah, no, we need to, yeah.
Thank you.
Josh, go ahead.
So I would like to see the date stay the same as it currently is for everything. However, I conceding to how Leanne's putting it, I do think the cell phone and personal device prohibition could be done for the upcoming school year. And then if we did move forward, or when we move forward with the social media, as much as I don't want to see it pushed out to the following school year, I think separating the two out would be an appropriate workaround. And I think, just changing the effective dates for each section and I know there's pushback on could the districts in schools do it? I mean, there are other schools that we've heard testimony from that have done it in a fairly quick amount of time. From the time of deciding that was what they're going to do to implementation, sounds like it was only a few months across most cases, which is what we have till the next school year. So, I'd like to see at least the cell phone and personal device prohibition happen for the next school year. If we are going to push the other out further.
So I might disagree with what you heard in testimony. What I heard from Harwood and Stowe and Peoples was that they spent an enormous amount of time getting buy-in, talking with parents and community members and students, and that it wasn't just, boom, we did it, and here it is.
No, I agree with that. But that's the process leading up to making the decision to do so. Once they made the decision to do it, the next step of the process, which would be creating the policy and how it works, and the implementation of such after getting all of that feedback and that discussion did not take as long. It was a quicker time frame, which to me, my understanding was, 3-4 months. The rest of the process of getting the buy-in, talking to community, yes, that was the longer piece, but we've been doing that in our testimony here, working through all of that initial stuff they already did. Is what I'm saying is, well, yes, that did take a long time. The actual implementation and procedural work did not sound like it took as long as we're saying it's going to take.
Representative Brady, Representative Taylor.
Buy-in matters, and buy-in's a process, even if the end is already determined. It's the process of people being heard and feeling like they have, like to Kate's point, I don't think we can end run. We might be bought in, but when people are really pissed off at their school, they're not going to come find us. They're going to the principal or the teachers. So I think we put schools in a really crummy position if we say like, oh no, you're not going to have time to, they're going to have to communicate it. They're the ones who need to own it. And so they've got to have the on-ramp time for that buy-in. So to the deadline piece, I think I'd love to say like, yep, there's a way to do it for next year. I don't think practically speaking there is. My timeline concern is to our esteemed senators, if we say, oh, well, we're not going to take this up till next January, and then we'll really, really do it. Like if we're serious about July 1, 2026, it has to happen this session. It has to happen this year so that there is that year for the model policy, for the boards to then develop the model policy or create a better one, for schools to have meetings where teenagers come and tell them it will be the end of the world when they don't have their phones. All these things will happen. CBSD is probably going to go device free next year. It has been a long series of communication to parents, to students. And it's not that everybody's like, yes, great, do it. Kids are still like, no, you're going to ruin our lives, but they're going to do it. But they've had a process, like you see that buy-in process, even if you don't like the outcome, the process and that time and engagement matters. And if we just stick it on schools, they're the ones though that are going to get the feedback, not us. They're not coming to the Ed Committee or their legislators. So I want to do it as fast as possible. And to me, fast as possible means we've got to do it this session to have any way of getting to July 1, 2026. And I'm concerned the Senate might not feel the same way.
So I'm gonna say a little bit of, I'm gonna give an opposite view on that, is that these schools were going at it alone to implement these policies. That's why they needed a really long process of buy-in and communication with the people of their towns to do that kind of together, right? We're talking about a blanket. We're talking about this is just the way it is. Yeah, I am always for buy-in, but I don't necessarily think that the buy-in is necessary when it's gonna come down from this building to say, this is the way it is. I don't think they need that process. So I think we can do it quicker. I think the 2025 for the cell phone ban, but I would love to keep that as the timeline. And then when we do start discussing the personal electronic devices again, I'm gonna throw out there that can we just name the ones that we know and put that in there instead of having all those other flexibilities? With maybe a caveat of, you know, as things progress and a little bit of a ability for administrators to, as things progress and new electronics come out, to do it. We'll have to work it out. But the timeline for sure.
Appreciate that, yeah.
Well, and there's two things that we're concerned with now, right?
Right.
That's it. Listing.
For now.
What are the two
For now.
things?
Earbuds and smartphones.
What about Google Glass?
2025.
Yeah, I was just saying that I think that the reason that there's so much buy-in needed for these districts is that they were going in a pack alone. And this, what we're doing is everybody's in this together and this is the way it's gonna be. Obviously, buy-in is always great to have, but I don't think it's as necessary when it's coming to just a straight ban across the board.
I guess I'd say it's not just buy-in though, too. It's also communication and doing it for your community. Like it's a little bit contrast, like, you know, the rules were coming down from here, but people weren't coming here to scream at their schools. If you went to school board meetings during COVID, that was like, miserable because they were mad, you know, people were mad about on all levels, too strict, not strict enough, do this, don't do that. And schools didn't have, they were just implementing. And this is different, but I do think that like there's some analogies to schools need to be able to communicate to their people in their ways. And it doesn't necessarily change the outcome. If the rule is this is the rule.
Okay.
But they are gonna need to be like, they're the ones that are gonna get the whatever it is in your face. And unfortunately, then they're the ones that it's like, so then people expend their energy on schools, not on like, how's my kid doing academically and what's our reading program, but cell phones or masks, or you name it. And so I guess it's not just buy-in, but it's communication because they're the ones that are doing it and they're the ones who are going to receive the feedback unfiltered from the community.
So I'll just be a political realist, nothing to do with policy, but the level to which we are disagreeing on this one issue is something that can potentially hold something else to try to make something go through. And the end result would probably simply be 2026 anyway. So from a political reality point of view, I bring that up. Because I would like to see us have this move this year in a way that it gets everything rolling this year. Colin's point about, gee, if we're going to wait until next year to act on it, and then it's, you know.
It's gonna be.
I just am kind of on board with the points you made earlier. Most schools are doing this already anyway. They already have policies. And if they don't, they're moving that way. And if you're gonna set the message, if it's this will be law on July 1st, 2026, or whatever the date is, it gives you your on-ramp time. They're doing it anyway. It might speed up the process of them doing it, knowing it's coming. So I don't think having 26 as opposed to 25 is a deal breaker in the situation.
We only have 10 minutes left, I think, on this topic, and I just want to talk about personal electronic devices, if you could put the language up. While that's coming up, I just would like everybody to recognize how much more enjoyable this debate is than other debates that we've had previously. We're all heading in the exact same direction.
Smithing is his big idea.
We're more confident in a positive outcome for students and educators
Yes.
than in some of the other enormous things we're wrestling with, that positive parts aren't quite as clear.
Before we break for the PCBs, I'll have one more thing that I'll
Okay.
just throw in there. It's not a monkey wrench, it's just a thing.
All right.
I'm not trying to slogan that question. I was just looking at his testimony. I couldn't remember whether we had VSBA in testifying.
He was here, Sue was here, she wasn't testifying, but she.
Yeah, the only comment was VSBA is well equipped to create model policies.
Yeah.
And so someone who said that they were already started work policy. It'd be great to know.
Yeah, we can find, would you actually,
I'm not trying to.
would you email Sue? and say-
I will,
yeah.
I will. I'm not trying to slow this down.
No, I totally understand, yeah. Okay, so personal electronic device. I think we've had a number of people say this could be anything from an old Walkman to,
To
Scientific.
one of those things, hearing aids, those.
yeah, right, the hearing aids.
Right.
Hearing aids would be on the 504, though, so you'd be okay.
Well, somebody said, oh, they capture information.
So what do we want to do with this, Representative Taylor?
Well, I was suggesting that we just name, for now, we just name the watches, the headphones.
There you go, done.
All right, I'll let you
Anything
know.
else we can discuss here, but
Bluetooth
And
earbuds.
just kind of- yeah, narrow it down a little bit for this bill.
All right, people from the field.
iPads.
I think that would be daring tech billionaires to invent the next thing that's really is that wasn't on our list.
Always gonna invent it.
Representative McCann,
I would strike it completely and just go with cell phones.
Representative Brady,
I like that idea. I have a really hard time with watches. I am very stuck on watches. I don't want to go, I don't really want to spend even a minute talking about watches, but like when I have 10,000 bands, it's like a personal fashion thing for me. I don't even know how to use that. Like I think it feels weird to say like teachers can't wear your watches to school feels a little,
It's Andy.
like,
Yeah.
you know,
It's kids.
it's not teachers. It still feels like, oh, it's hard to buy a watch that's not digital now. Like if you want kids to have, I want, kids to know the time. And also like they track your steps, they do like things, people are into that. And that is a part of our culture to say the watch thing feels, and I get, like, I don't want the second graders with the Gizmo watches playing games. I don't know, the watches for me are, I feel really weird about the watches, like.
couldn't solve it.
Anyway.
If you name specific ones, you're setting up for the 12-year-old to fight with the teacher and the administrator every day that wants to have an argument. Well, this doesn't count, but this does count. I'm not as hung up on including the personal devices. I could certainly agree with Rep McCann, just leave the piece out. If you are going to put language, you could say such as, but not limited to language, like Rep Taylor said.
Do it.
Let's solve it or muddy it.
No, I'm just gonna, as far as the watches have cell phone ability.
Yes, it's the texting.
There's been many times in the hallways with third graders texting their parents and talking to their parents on their watches that I've seen. So it's, yeah, but I get your point.
I know.
It's just, that's a very,
Earbuds,
So weird,
go.
but that.
Get rid of them.
sounds Just.
This wasn't about earbuds. I was gonna say language that says that accesses the internet and allows you to communicate with others through this device.
Although if it's just a, like yours,
Oh, I'm getting texts. I've been ignoring the 5 million texts that I've gotten since we've had this conversation. And it's been very hard for me to do that
like it was just count.
Exactly.
because I can't read. It's used too small.
All right, Josh, you're up.
Tells you when you're gonna.
Well, and so, right, just to what Beth said, right, the 5 million text messages that she just got. Now, depending on the school's policy and where they're going to put those phones or devices, right? So if they're in a shoe rack in homeroom and you're within distance for that Bluetooth signal to pick it up, you're still getting the text, you're still getting all of that stuff. So I think that's where the watches do come into play. I understand, Aaron, your thoughts on that, and I don't necessarily disagree, but they're connected, right? And unless that phone is off and put away, like away, but no one's going to turn them off. I will say that. A lot of times they won't get turned off. They'll get thrown wherever they are, unless that's part of the school's policy, which we haven't dictated that in our language. And it doesn't sound like we want to get that granular, so we're relying on someone else to do that. So I do think that things like watches. We got to throw in tablets, right? Because a tablet is basically a big fat phone. And so I do think I like the definition as it is, as you guys probably would already assume, but I do like where Rep. Taylor is going with it. Well, condensing error evenly ends argument of if it can connect to the internet or through Wi-Fi or cellular, or connect to another device that could be connected to the internet or Wi-Fi through Wi-Fi or cellular. That is a way to broaden it without being specific.
I will, again, put this on the table, that if we are going to have the approach of the AOE in collaboration with these to create a required model policy, we can order them to consider the inclusion of personal electronic devices and kind of let them figure this out with the folks in the field. Just a suggestion, Representative Long.
So I'm again gonna go back to why we're here, and this is about the safety of our students. And I don't see how we can't put in personal electronic devices. And I agree with you, except I would say that not consider, but to include. That's my perspective on this.
Go ahead, please, Representative McCann.
I'm just going back to Rep. Dobrowitch's tablets. We have kids who only read books read to them.
Well, we do have the built-in
Damn it.
administrator can do anything they want.
Well,
And we also have our school devices.
They call the new tablet or an e-reader. They need
they all
a
need,
Kindle, whatever. They're okay.
they all need headphones for
That's right, that's
standardized
when
alone.
the smart admin go.
Well,
I'll need headphones for standardized.
to that.
We've also-
got to bring in-
Speak to them.
Used to
Because,
use my headphones.
We can get
Sorry, limited time.
Speak to that.
It's on the computer.
That's only if we change the language about the administrator, because it said specifically cell phone. And I said, then it should say cell phone or electronic
I already brought
device.
that up.
And if you
Okay,
put
so-
that in there, then that
so-
covers it.
Since we are now out of time, I'm going to give Ledge Council some direction to come back
Here.
to us that has the agency in collaboration with the usual suspects to develop a required model policy, and the usual must be at least as robust as. We won't necessarily define electronic device, but that will include electronic devices. And add the word electronic device to the administrative exception. Are we not defining social media?
I think we're better not to.
I'm not sure you need any of these definitions if
Right.
you're asking.
Yeah.
I mean, you certainly can. And I would encourage you to, if you are attached to language, but if you are not attached to language, if you're asking for the development of the model policy, I think that's okay, but then you have to live with the consequences of that.
Okay, Rob, one little thing.
Here's my thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I feel really good about this because I believe this is about our students and student health and well-being. I was thinking about the testimony yesterday from Visa, and I was talking with Rep. Taylor earlier about this, and I just sort of feel like, I know that they have strong opinions, in other ways, and they want to go their own way. And you know what? If it's gonna help, then take out independent schools, let them do their own thing. I just feel like this is way too important to be held up by, well, we think we can do this better. So if they think they can do it better, then maybe they're different. Maybe, they've got borders, they get this, that, and the other thing. And I guess I see this as a national groundswell, and I'm just saying like.
So I'm going to just say, we can let AOE sort that out in their model policy. Yes.
In a world where they were two separate worlds, absolutely great, easy done. We have students on public tuition going to independent schools. Those are in our public system, publicly funded. Again, this is why a dual system is complicated.
And I'll bring up my usual thing is I don't want, publicly funded students getting their public education at an independent school being compelled in any way, shape or form to have to own an electronic devices.
I also don't want to see a mass exodus to independent schools. That's where you get to use your cell phone. And I know that that might sound unrealistic, but it is potentially an unintended consequence.
I suspect they have.
With early college.
I would say, I think independent schools are on board with wanting to do this too. And I think so long as there's flexibility for the administrator to have that language was added by the AOE, because they want to do it, they are doing it. They just need to have certain considerations that are unique to their needs.
I'm not unsympathetic to
Yeah.
the need to define what a campus is or, you know, when the school day ends and you're off skiing.
They want a cell phone. They have cell phone programs.
When do you want this new language?
When does your schedule allow this new language?
Changes by the minute.
All right,
Do tomorrow?
that'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you for hurting these feral cats.
Did your unclear, unambiguous guidance?
You'll get something tomorrow.
Tracking like the dual.
This is all about the big bike event this weekend.
Yes. Yes.
Mo Wilson. I didn't sign up for it.
We're gonna, while you everybody break, we're gonna reconvene sharp